I'm Dave. I identify myself as male. And I work as a carer in a care home.
Hi, I'm Donna. I'm Dave's partner, and I am, well, basically retired care, and I'm from Canada.
I've known since I was 4. And I've been always wanted to be a boy, so it's been a long time now. When I was younger, there was nothing around, so I couldn't do anything about it then. So I did it now. Just before I met Donna, well, I was looking on the internet for things because there's new things weren't right. So basically, then I changed my life around. I needed to do something about it, so I did.
When I first met Dave, I met him via the internet and had no clue until I decided to come over here. And then he told me about him, and it threw me for about 5 seconds. I was very emotional because I thought I had lost somebody that meant the world to me. And all it took was him to say, is I'm still the same person inside, and I got it. And I've never looked back.
I went through the stage that I thought I was lesbian. But I knew I wasn't because it wasn't right, you know.
He spent his life with everybody putting him in a box they thought he belonged in. And I think had he not transitioned, I think it would have been a life of pure struggle for him. I used to see the hurt and pain in his eyes before he got to go to the first stage of going to the gender clinic. The fear and the worry is they're not going to accept me, they're going to send me away. He was waiting for his chest surgery, and it seemed like one hand didn't know what the other one was doing. Oh, this one's supposed to do it. No, that one's supposed to do it. And we were going to the clinic in London, and I said, that's it, no more. And I went in and I told them, and I forget the psychologist's name. He was brilliant. He said, really? I thought you would have had your surgery by now. Just a minute. Went out, called the surgeon himself, and a week later he had an appointment. But there was a lot of miscommunication. It's the older generation that's waited too long. Somebody that's in their late 40s, in their 50s. I mean, they should be able to live out their whatever years they have left of their life in peace, being the person they truly are. Yeah. When he came home from his first surgery, he was like a newborn baby. He had his arm in a sling, 70 stitches in his behind, full of stitches in the front. He was totally helpless. I worry about other people that have to go through that don't have that support. I fear for those people because for them it must seem absolutely hopeless. Education, education, education. The more it's out there, they could have care sessions about it to be educated at every level of healthcare, right from understanding the dynamics of being trans to the care and what's needed, not just physically, but emotionally. And they need to have compassion and understanding and be non-judgmental because they're not in that person's shoes. They haven't lived that person's life, so they can't come in here and go, oh, whatever, because then you're in the wrong business. If you're not caring and compassionate and have understanding and tolerance, then you're in the wrong job. I'm sorry. How many people have died because they think they can't cope and they don't think there's any help out there? Support, compassion, understanding.
If you want something that badly, just do it and go for it, because at the end of the day, I'm happier in myself. I am who I am become, you know.
There's just not enough support out there for the people that are transitioning that have either been disowned by their family due to lack of ignorance or literally have nobody. They need somebody there to hold their hand through it all because it's life-changing. Our life is that much better because he's happier in himself. I just give kudos to the trans community because I think they are the bravest people I know. They should be proud. They're heroes. He's my hero. I couldn't do what he's done. I couldn't do it. It takes guts and courage to stand up and say, this is who I am, and I'm going to change me outside because I'm not happy. The surgeries, the infections, the time off work.
It was worth it at the end of the day.
It was worth it, but who would just wake up one day and decide this is what they're going to do? You know? So be brave. There's always someone out there that's going to care.
Hi, I'm Cat Burton. I identify as a transgender woman. I work as a flight instructor at Aeros Cardiff and also as an independent aviation and diversity consultant. I should have known that I was going to transition at the age of 14, but it was such a horrific prospect at the time. I looked like what I was, a 14-year-old rugby-playing schoolboy in a frock, and it just put me off completely, and I locked it away in a box marked "Do Not Open." And that box remained locked until I was in my late 50s. I was convinced at the time that as an airline pilot it would be a career-breaking move to transition at work. But then I was fortunate to meet two transgender pilots, and they both transitioned successfully at work and with the support of their colleagues and management. And then by sheer chance I was grounded by the Civil Aviation Authority, who'd found something unusual in my heart trace when I had an ECG at a routine medical. I simply couldn't console myself at having to go back to being him. And I realised that if I tried to go back to work as him, I would fail. I wouldn't pass the simulator tests, which I'd need to get current again. I'd be simply too psychologically damaged to be able to do that. So I phoned British Airways up and said, it's going to be Cat who comes back to work, and the reaction was priceless. The manager who was looking after my absence said, "Oh, thank God for that, Cat. All that work I've done through the summer to find out how to bring you back as Cat isn't going to go to waste." I was supported at that level from that moment on. It literally was the best 4 years of my flying career until I finally retired last year. My GP couldn't refer me direct to a gender identity clinic. I had to be referred to the local mental health care team. That mental health care professional had to refer me to her supervisor for money, and then back to her for the ability to refer me to a single gender identity clinic, which is in Charing Cross Clinic. They then took their usual 15 months to even respond to the fact that I'd been referred. I couldn't have been quicker or easier in terms of the way I whistled through Charing Cross. Literally 3 appointments and I was done with them. Every single GP should appreciate that they're going to have transgender patients, and they should educate themselves. There's lots of online training materials they can use. It's all accredited stuff, and if every single GP knew what a transgender patient needed, that would improve healthcare going forward. Well, I'm 66 now, and obviously still working really hard. I'm doing 70 or 80 hour working weeks. Growing old is something that still seems to me to be something that's very far distant. They say 60 is the new 40. Well, yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with that. I'm surrounded by family, but eventually let's assume that I'm all on my own in a care home, and I think that's the point at which dignity raises its head, because transgender people do have needs which aren't necessarily obvious to care workers. A transgender woman that suddenly isn't capable of looking after their facial hair in the way that they've grown accustomed to, or a transgender woman that has to wear a wig and has to be seen then by care workers without it, who may not perhaps take the greatest of care in presenting them for the other people living in the home. I think there are some very specific needs about ageing transgender people, some of which may be best addressed by having quite specific care homes. But for me anyway, that seems to be 20 or 30 years hence, and I've never been much to look that far in the future.
It's been a life of concealment, really. I tried telling my mother when I was 26. She listened for a minute or two and she said to me, "Well, I can't help you." And she got up and she went to bed. That was upsetting. If it hadn't been for books, I would have done myself in a long time ago, because I could escape into books. It did completely take me out of myself, and that kept me going. Pamela, who became my partner, going back about 10 years ago, she knew what I was doing because I'd started off again down the course I'm going. And she said to me, "If you change sex, you'll have to leave the house." And I thought, considering you met me at the point when I was lowest, and right from the beginning I told her about my situation. We lived together for 28 years at that point, and that was one of the factors which made me pull back, because the idea of going out and finding another place to live was very difficult. The problems that I faced growing older as a registered social worker, now retired, then I'm aware of what the problems are. From a transgender point of view, I've had mixed response. The first GP I had in the surgery I'm at the moment, when I asked her for estrogen, she was quite horrified, and she looked at me and she said to me, well, I don't agree that the National Health Service should have to pay for medication like this for people like you. And I was a little bit shocked by that. So I said to her, what if I pay for it myself? Everybody else in Wales was getting their prescription paid for them. She accepted that. If I paid, I could have it. And for about 2 years, I was paying for my prescriptions. And pharmacists would say to me, you shouldn't be paying for this. But she made her mind up. She'd put this on the notes on the computer. This person pays for them. That I found infuriating. I think the best advice I can give from my own experience is, if you're not sure of something, ask the trans person, because they know more about the problem that they and other trans people experience than anybody else. It's not a question of we want to talk about it because it's good fun. It's simply a question of we want you to understand so that you can do what's best for us and help us. I actually ignored what I knew I wanted to do and what was right for me. I'm not going to back down this time. It's the only way I can be myself. Since I've made the decision that I'm not going back, I feel better in myself, even though I'm sure other people won't be too happy about it. But I'm afraid I've reached a point where other people have to accommodate me rather than me accommodating them. I don't want to reach the end of my life never having been myself. I don't know how many years I've got left, and I certainly intend for them to be lived for me, by me, as me.
I'm Annabelle. I identify as female. I work at anything I can to make a living, but I think of myself more as an artist than anything else. I'd spent a lifetime swinging backwards and forwards to what I perceived to be female behaviour and to extreme male behaviour. And I toyed with the idea in the 80s and the 90s, but hadn't done anything about it. I think the key moment was when my identical twin became ill with cancer, and he said, look, you've got to be yourself, otherwise you're going to drive yourself insane, which was quite a revelation at the time because he was always ambiguous about me. It wasn't the fact that he was anti-trans, he knew trans people, it was the fact that when he saw me, it was like seeing himself, and that sort of psychologically threw him. I think the major issue in my own life has been finding ways to cope with being trans all those years, especially when I was younger and a different age. You felt like it was perverse and you were doing something wrong, and that's not right. It's not right at all. What has kept me sane throughout my life is my art, and that has been important to me. It's provided an avenue, almost a therapy. My interaction with healthcare professionals have been very, very mixed. My biggest complaint is the different methods of referral. For example, one person was referred to an endocrinologist and got prescribed hormones fairly quickly. Another person I know, her GP, prescribed hormones. I had to wait until I got to Charing Cross Gender Identity Clinic, which was quite a long time to wait, because I had to see 2 independent psychiatrists within Wales before they would consider even referring me, and then I waited 12 months to get my first appointment at Charing Cross. When I was finally diagnosed as gender dysphoric and they could see I was serious and had all this medication prescribed. If you understand NHS Wales, because there's no trans services in Wales, they have to contract the job out, so to speak, to Charing Cross in London, the Gender Identity Clinic. And I came back with all this medication I was supposed to be having. I went to see my GP and he turned around and said, oh, you've got to pay for this. I said, pardon, you realise that I'm gender dysphoric and I need this medication. Now you're telling me I've got to pay for this. Like it's a choice I've made. And it's not a choice. It's something, if I don't do it, it's going to drive me insane. Fortunately, it was a group practice, so I just went in and saw another GP, and then he looked at the stuff, looked at my history and said, well, no, that's absolute nonsense. And I've heard a lot of stories about GPs being obstructive or not helpful or not understanding. I find not necessarily obstruction, but a lack of understanding and a lack of urgency. It's like you're not physically unwell, so you can wait. You know, once you've paid rent and bills and financial commitments and you're on a minimum wage, to actually try and transition takes some doing, you know. At the time I realised that if I didn't transition, then something serious would happen to me. My moods were becoming blacker and blacker and blacker. I saw a light at the end of the tunnel in being able to transition. So I'd waited a long time to actually come to that decision. And then when I actually came to the decision and wanted to do something about it, then I'm waiting longer still. To make my experience more positive and more effective, it would be nice to be listened to straight away and taken seriously straight away. And I can understand there's a need for evaluation and there's a need for assessment. But my God, it needs to happen a lot quicker than it is, because the longer it takes, the more it's like you're on tenterhooks. You're waiting on this edge to actually validate yourself. It's like your whole life is on hold. It would be unrealistic to expect every GP to know the ins and outs of trans care and trans issues. But what they need to do is listen to you and take it seriously.
The aim of this project has been to capture the life stories and life experiences of older trans people over 50 years of age who lived in Wales for a significant period of time. It might not have been their whole life, but this is what they call home. Just learning from them about their experiences of whether it be transitioning and going through that gender reassignment process, whether it be about feeling included or integrated within your own local community. Unfortunately, experiences of hate crime and experiences of being misgendered within their own communities and by professionals. And a really important part is capturing their hopes and expectations connected to aging, what they want to see an older life look like for them as trans individuals, and connected to that, how they want to be treated by health and social care professionals.
Right from the beginning, we said this project is going to include trans people being properly involved, upskilling trans people to do the work, and the researchers all working together where the work and the management are shared.
What I found, we listen and mould our ideas around the trans community. I've been meeting people who have the grace and the warmth to explain to me things that I didn't understand, that I couldn't understand being cis. People have been very generous towards me in ways that I've been thinking that have not been quite appropriate. I felt that I was in a safe environment, and I think that's interesting. But it was me being the cis person saying, I feel I'm in a protected space.
An important element of this was recruiting researchers who are part of the trans community.
Yes, that was essential. It seems to me strange that I've hardly read any research where that's been the case.
Surveying the knowledge and the attitudes of people who are working within health and social care, and to see how they may provide better care and what the levels of knowledge might be now.
Because we have seen evidence in the past of mistreatment, people being laughed at because their bodies don't fit the expectations of the care workers. And particularly I've seen occasionally if people are discriminated against by their peers in social care environments, then the health workers tend to go the same way. Because our generation were people who more or less did what they were told to do, doctor knows best, we're not good at fighting for our rights. And unless you're somebody who is already confident and out there, there's some evidence of people from our community being marginalised. And I think that's really sad.
The other area that we've done is an online survey with health and social care professionals. There's quite a number of different survey questions that other people have used about attitudes towards trans people and sort of, if you like, measures of transphobia. And we've used some of those, but the others are more tailored to, well, what experiences might you have if you're working in health and social care of working with people who identify as trans. We've gone through different networks of GPs, local authorities, to include social work, care homes, networks, just to give some examples.
Using a trans person as the lead in the interviewing is making the interviewee more comfortable. It's partly about shared experiences. And you upskill them, you really involve them. Their confidence improves, and afterwards they're able to go and do things that previously they'd never even have thought of doing.
And there were people who were, I suppose you might say, late developers, or most people kind of had always had some, or from a quite early age, aware of something different about them, and the commonality in the non-acceptance, that sort of struck me.
If I, as an older trans person, had to go into care because I was starting to get Alzheimer's, would they see my trans status as confusion? Or would I get to a point where I suddenly think, why is my body like this? I'm not supposed to be out.
We know very little about older trans people's experiences of ageing, their expectations around ageing, how earlier pivotal life events and moments in their biography have shaped and informed how they see themselves now and how they relate to other people now.
We really haven't studied what it's like for somebody to be on cross-sex hormones for 40 or 50 years, how early surgeries done in the 70s and 80s are performing now, and the care workers have no concept even of what that's about. And my family doesn't talk to me in the main. My granddaughter does, but the rest of my family doesn't. I look to the trans community for my support. And when I go into care, I don't want my family interfering because it probably wouldn't be in a positive way.
Growing up in our era where information was television, newspaper, and old books, you weren't going to find out about being trans. But with the internet, you can just Google it. You know, I'm a boy who should be a girl. Oh, I'm not the only one.
And not only, exactly. It's not so only the information, but the feeling of I'm not the only one.
So at the end of this project, we're bringing together trans community members and small groups of health and social care professionals. A series of workshops across Wales where we're going to present some of our initial findings and then use that as a basis to having a shared conversation together about well, what do we need to do in terms of developing some good practice guidelines?
Getting the richness of people's stories out there is really important for health and social care professionals themselves, but for other community members and broader than that as well. And showing the areas where there might be things in common, commonalities, showing the breadth of people's life experiences.
And I think it's really important that, as well as informing and providing resources for the health professionals, we also inform and train the trans community.
I think at the end of the day, we want to ensure that Wales is a good place to be trans and to grow older. And I hope that this research could inform that and be part of that, that bigger story.